Hello everybody and welcome to Car Confections. You see what we have sitting behind us right now? We have the 2023 Hyundai IONIQ 5, and in today's video we're going to be doing a real-world range test.
Now before we hop inside and get into this real world range test, let's first kind of look at the exterior and give you guys a little bit of the baseline specifications for this model. So what we're looking at here is the dual motor all-wheel drive version of the IONIQ 5. This is going to be producing 320 horsepower, so this is a pretty powerful model. And one of the things that's of course very relevant for this range test is the fact that for 2023, Hyundai has bumped the range up by 10 miles for the dual motor all-wheel drive. So that means this one is rated for 266 miles of maximum range. Now as far as your battery pack, that's going to be a little over 70 kilowatt hours. It's going to be 77.4 kilowatt hours to be exact for this larger model. There is also the SE standard range with the 58 kilowatt hour battery, but not too many people are going to be buying that. Most IONIQ 5s have the 77.4 kilowatt hour battery. This is actually a very fast model. It can go 0 to 60 in 5 seconds, but that's not what today's test is going to be all about. Of course, this is the real world range test. So unlike some of the other channels you may have seen out there on the internet, we're not going to do like a 70-mile-an-hour highway test and just burn the battery down to 0. Most people in their real life don't just drive out of the driveway and get straight onto the interstate until the battery goes dead. Most people in the real world are going to be driving in all types of different circumstances. So our real world test is going to be a circuit that includes city driving, stop and go driving, highway driving, and full speed interstate driving, a combination of all 4 of those things to give you guys a real picture of what you can expect when you drive this in the real world. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it.
All right guys, so we've went ahead and hopped inside and we're beginning our range test. We've went ahead and put everything in its correct modes, and let's go ahead and just talk about what rules we're following for this range test itself. So we have 4 main rules. The first one is that we're going to follow the speed limit. We're not going to be speeding. Additionally, we are also going to keep our accelerations. We're not going to be doing super hard accelerations as that burns more range. The vehicle is already in eco drive mode. Additionally, we are also in the maximum regen mode because that affects your range figures itself. So those are the 4 main things that we're going to be following here today. Also, the climate is on. You know, most people don't sit in their car and drip sweat down their face, you know, and just sweat it out. Yes, you can go a little bit further if you turn the climate off. Actually, as a matter of fact, this IONIQ 5 has a range figure with climate and with it off. So it's 208 miles or 219 miles with the climate on or off, but we're going to have it on 72 degrees, and the climate is also in eco mode.
Now another real world thing about this is going to be that this is charged to 90% as our start. When you own one of these vehicles, the default is going to be to charge to 90%. That's just to keep your vehicle in long-term good condition as far as the battery is concerned. You can, of course, manually make it 100% when you need to go on a long road trip, but your day-to-day life, you're really going to be operating most of the time within that 90% and lower range. As such, let's talk a little bit about the range number. So you heard Mason kind of mention a little bit about what Hyundai is projecting here on the screen, which we'll keep up throughout this test. You can see that we have a maximum range right now of 219 with climate off and 208 as it currently stands with the climate control on. You'll probably notice that that is a good deal less than the 266 we talked about on the outside, and it is actually less than 90% of 266
Yeah, that's about 239 miles.
This is a press car, so what this vehicle is doing is actually making an estimation based on historical driving data. So historically, people will probably drive this very aggressively. I know the person driving this down to us was driving 85 on the interstate. So that was the most recent trip as to this trip.
Which is obviously not the most efficient way to
exactly,
drive.
far from. So it is going to be making that estimate. We'll see, but we are anticipating, you know, that we're not going to see the miles melt off as fast, because it's the car's expectation is that we're going to be driving a little bit like maniacs, which we're not going to be. We're going to be keeping, you know, acceleration at about 50% or less, you know, keeping up with traffic here. And like I said, simulating all those real world conditions that you will see as you drive this vehicle.
And with that being said, we are on our first part of the leg. This is what we call city driving. The entire loop is about 30 miles here in Lexington. It consists of about 50% city driving, 50% highway and interstate driving. And this is the first leg. This is going between probably on average 25 and 45 miles an hour, stop and go for red lights. But we do have other parts of the drive coming up, as well as an interstate drive, a highway drive, and a stop and go traffic drive. So all of that will be in this test drive loop. But we're on our first leg here, so we'll see how this IONIQ 5's range holds up. So we are wrapping up the city driving portion. So that's leg one, and we're about to head to the interstate and do the interstate portion. But we wanted to go ahead and do a check-in, see how this IONIQ 5 is holding up when it comes to the range. So far we've gone 10.8 miles. Our projected range is sitting at 203 miles, so we were indeed right about that. Going 10 miles, it certainly is not draining at exactly a 1-to-1 ratio for range as compared to our mileage. The average efficiency here is 4.1 miles per kilowatt hour, so that is pretty solid efficiency. But we're on the on-ramp now to head onto the interstate, so we can see how this IONIQ 5 is going to hold up on the interstate going 70 miles per hour.
This has so much power, even merging onto the interstate here. I'm still only going 50% of acceleration to get us up to that 70 mile an hour mark. It's a very nice, powerful motor. In the city driving, most of it I was driving about 10% to 25% of acceleration just to keep up with traffic. So, you know, you can really, when you're driving normally at a normal pace, you really don't have to like dip into the power too much at all.
And while we're just on the interstate, I do want to talk about the ride quality of this IONIQ 5. I think this is just something worth pointing out. It is so comfortable. When you hit a bump, this vehicle is very much sprung to be comfort oriented. So this honestly thrives here on the interstate.
Wonderful.
I mean, it just does a fantastic job. The seats are incredibly comfortable. So you're definitely going to be happy road tripping it, which is why it is important that we have this, you know, range figure try going, you know, on the highway, because you might want to take this on a road trip, that's for sure. And if you want to know all the details about this, we haven't mentioned this up until this point, but we do have a full review of the IONIQ 5 on the channel, our full 7-day impressions, where we go through the interior, the exterior, all the powertrain bits, we get hard accelerations, all those things are on, it's already on the channel, so you can go ahead and check that out. You won't want to miss out on all those details in the full review. All right, and we are pulling off the interstate here. We drove about 8 miles, so 17.9 miles is our total so far for the trip. Our average miles per kilowatt hour did go down as expected. Highway driving or interstate driving is not actually the most efficient way to drive an EV, that's for sure. So it did go down a little bit from the previous miles per kilowatt hour, but we're still sitting at a pretty healthy number there for sure. And now the car is projecting 197 miles of range.
All right, so now we're entering into the next section.
This would be the highway
drive. This is, as opposed to the interstate, this section will be about 55 miles per hour.
And I'm curious to see how the range figures, how the trip, the efficiency, the miles per kilowatt hour, that's really a very important thing with an EV, is figuring out how efficient it is. And this IONIQ 5 is promising to be a very efficient EV. A lot of cars that have a lot bigger battery packs on it have a lot worse range, that's for sure. So I'm very curious to see how this stacks up. We're currently sitting at 83% charge on the battery pack. And the projected range is 195 miles. If we turn climate off, we'd be looking at 207 miles of projected range. Now, I want to do a little bit of math with you guys, because of course that is a part of owning an EV, figuring out how far it is, how efficient, and all of that. Now, with an 83% charge state, we have a maximum range of 266 miles is our estimated. So if we take 83% of that, we should be sitting at about 220 miles of range. That once again kind of shows what we've been talking about a little bit earlier, where the Hyundai system is kind of building in a little bit of padding. Also, it is basing it on previous driving history. This vehicle has been driven 6,400 miles, and it is a pressed vehicle, so people tend to drive those a little harder. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're going to be sitting quite a bit above these range figures right here. And if you're looking at the average miles per kilowatt hour, we're sitting at very, very healthy numbers, especially for how big the battery size is on this IONIQ 5. Now, another number I do want to mention involves the miles per kilowatt hour. So at 77.4 kilowatt hour battery pack is what you get on this IONIQ 5 dual motor model. We're going to take 82% state of charge, which means that on this particular model, as we're sitting right now, we're sitting at 63.46 kilowatt hours of electricity in the battery pack. If we multiply that by the average efficiency that we've been getting of 4 miles per kilowatt hour, we're sitting at our projected range of what we've been driving today of 253.87 miles. So that is quite a bit higher than what we're seeing here on this IONIQ 5 projected thing from Hyundai. Now, do also keep in mind that's factoring in that there's zero battery degradation and a few different things. There could be a few factors at play there other than just that, but the efficiency is reading quite a bit higher than what we're seeing here. You know, and another thing that I've been noticing on our drive is keeping track of where we are, and it's telling us where the nearest charger is. So it says 1.4 miles that way is a Good Foods Co-op charger. When we drove by the Nissan dealership, it said there was a Nissan charger there. So little helpful tidbits of information from Hyundai about where to charge this vehicle. Now, of course, I'm sure it's not like a level 3 fast charger or anything, but if you're really getting into a pinch and need a couple extra miles of range or whatnot, the IONIQ 5 is keeping track of it for you.
Right. I just like that you don't actually have to specifically look it up, you know, because it is just kind of sitting there, giving you that little reminder.
And we have concluded checkpoint 3, which is the highway section. We're heading into stop-and-go traffic. For those of you Lexington natives, Nicholasville Road is our choice for this. It's always a bunch of traffic, always stop and go. So this is kind of simulating like that intense city driving that a lot of you guys will be doing in your EVs. Not everyone's going to be on the highway. Not everyone's going to be on the interstate. We want to give a sample for everybody here. And this will be our last leg of it. Now, I do want to talk about where we're sitting at. So we're sitting at 29.5 miles is our total trip right now. Still an average of 4 miles per kilowatt hour. 57 minutes is how far we've been going, and our projected range, 192 miles on the Hyundai model. One thing I want to point out about this is I've been keeping track of this on my phone. So the checkpoint between checkpoint 2 and 3, we drove about 10 more miles, and we only lost 5 miles of range on the Hyundai. So that kind of goes to show you this projected range is not exactly the most accurate currently. It just is doing its best to try and figure out a safe, figure to tell us, so we're not going to run out of juice and all that. But we're actually kind of going double the amount of actual mileage as compared to what the range is actually ticking down.
Yeah, it's safe to say that Hyundai's estimate here is being very conservative. Now, as we come to a stop here, this would be a fitting time to mention that This does have one pedal drive, Hyundai speak that's called I-pedal. That is what we've been using today because that is technically your most aggressive regen setting, obviously. So with that, you're just gonna, let off the gas. It's gonna regen very aggressively and take you to a complete stop. As you can see, it just kind of goes into hold mode as well. So once you're at a complete stop, you can take your foot off the gas pedal and you stay down. I think we've really been recuperating quite a bit of power as another thing that really helps when you're driving in the city, because you have that constant stop and go.
Yeah,
so you can
for sure.
Keep recuperating energy.
All right, so we've just pulled into the church parking lot where we started this morning, and that is going to wrap up our loop here. Now, I do want to go ahead and say that we're not going to fully deplete this IONIQ 5's battery because it took us about an hour and 10 minutes to complete that loop, and guess what? If we wanted to fully deplete the battery, it would take like 8 or 9 hours, and you've all seen the video. Ain't nobody got time for that. We certainly don't.
Right.
If you want any more videos.
If you guys want some videos this week, we got to get back to work. Time's a ticking.
So what we're going to do is we're actually going to do the math on it.
Right. The most important figure is that miles per kilowatt hour. That's the number that helps you see the efficiency that the vehicle is operating at in these real world conditions that we put it through today. And with that number, then you can figure out, when I'm driving it in these conditions, how many miles can I go with that battery capacity, as opposed to what the EPA is estimating, as opposed to what Hyundai is estimating. So let's go ahead and math it up and see what we come out with.
Now, there are a few pertinent pieces of information here I want to talk about when it comes to how we're going to calculate the range on our test and how much that would get you in the real world. Now, the most important one would be the miles per kilowatt hour. Now, we averaged 4.1 miles per kilowatt hour across our 32.9 mile drive, with all those different sections as we talked about earlier. And that means, since we have a 77.4 kilowatt hour battery pack, if we multiply that by 4.1 miles, we have a theoretical projected range of 317 miles if we sat here and did that loop all day long on 100% state of battery, which certainly is well above the 266 that the EPA has rated this vehicle at. Now, do keep in mind, that's at a 100% state of charge, and that's also assuming no battery degradation whatsoever, which is not exactly realistic, so you can probably knock a little bit off of that. But certainly, we're still sitting well above what the EPA is estimating for this IONIQ 5, which I do think is very impressive.
Right. And speaking of estimating, let's also talk about the difference between what Hyundai estimates on the screen and what we're calculating. There's different factors involved with this, but mostly it's kind of just up to each brand's discretion how conservative or optimistic they want to be. So we formerly owned a Tesla Model 3, and that was a very optimistic vehicle. It would give you like that full range figure every time you got in the vehicle, but you were not going to achieve that at all. Hyundai actually takes an opposite approach. This is a very conservative number. You can see from the fact that what they projected at the very beginning was 204 miles. We drove 33 miles, and we dropped down
10 miles of range.
Just 10 miles
So we went 3 times more.
3 times more
without than what the range dropped. So very much Hyundai's being very conservative here, which I think is very impressive, considering that it's saying 200 miles of range, so nearly 200 miles of range. So, I mean, you could be going a long ways on a single charge.
And we observed
you can charge fast, too.
Yeah, right, and you can recharge back incredibly fast with this 800-volt architecture. But I was going to say, we also observed this happening in the IONIQ 6 when we tested that out in Arizona. It just seemed like you kept driving and driving and driving, and the range was barely changing, and that's because, we were going 3 miles per every mile that the system was estimating. So, there's a lot of things to consider when you own an electric vehicle, but we hope that today, this real-world Car Confections estimate will give you a more realistic picture of what you could expect if you actually own the IONIQ 5 and you drive it on that everyday life that has all different types of road terrains and textures.
And we do also want to remind you, if you haven't already checked out our full review of the Hyundai IONIQ 5 with our full 7-day impressions, go ahead and check that out. If you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for your continued support. And if you're new to this channel, we would love to welcome you into this Car Confections family. We do a ton of different things on this channel, full reviews, comparisons, we do range tests as well. So there's a lot of things you're not going to want to miss out on, so please hit that subscribe button down below. Anyway, we'll catch you next time as we sample more of the latest automotive delicacies.